Welcome to day 201 on the trail. We have four readings for today from Mark chapter 6 verses 30 through 52, 2 Samuel 17 verses 1 through 29, the Song of Solomon chapter 2 verses 1 through 17, and 3 Maccabees chapter 5 verses 1 through 51. In our reading from 2 Samuel today, you may have noticed that a few verses were repeated across adjoining days. This is because we are looking at a longer story of the usurpation of David's throne, and therefore I wanted to include a few of the verses that are part of the immediate context of the story to help with those connections. Now, moving to the Gospel of Mark. Here we find two very familiar stories: the feeding of the 5,000 and Jesus walking on the water. These two events open with a call for the disciples to rest. Given the size of the crowds and Jesus' growing popularity, they need time to eat and recover. So they boarded a boat and crossed the Sea of Galilee to a deserted place. However, the people saw them leaving and followed them on foot, arriving ahead of Jesus and the disciples. Yet Jesus is not annoyed by their persistence. Instead, we read in Mark chapter 6, verse 34. As he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion for them, because they were like sheep without a shepherd, and he began to teach them many things. The use of the phrase sheep without a shepherd reflects a similar image found in the Hebrew Bible as it refers to Israel. We also find this image connected with God's promise to care for his people in Ezekiel chapter 34. Reading from Ezekiel 34, verse 23. I will set up over them one shepherd, my servant David, and he shall feed them. He shall feed them and be their shepherd. As the good shepherd, Jesus both teaches those gathered and feeds them when daylight begins to fade. Now, since they're in a remote location, food cannot be found nearby. And not only would enough food to feed the crowd be nearly impossible to locate, it would also have been cost prohibitive. A denarius was equal to a day's wages, so 200 denarii would have been no small sum. However, the disciples find 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish, and they bring them to Jesus. Reading from the Gospel of Mark, verse 41. Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven, and blessed and broke the loaves, and gave them to his disciples to set before the people. And he divided the 2 fish among them all. And all ate and were filled. And they took up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces, and of the fish. As we discussed briefly in the parallel account from the Gospel of Luke on day 18, the language used there and the emphasis throughout this account on bread reflects the elements of the Lord's Supper. While the two events are not directly connected, we do see in both meals Jesus caring for his people as the true Good Shepherd in very powerful ways. What is particularly interesting in this miraculous feeding of the 5,000 is the lack of response from the disciples and the people. It almost seems as though this miracle of multiplication were nothing out of the ordinary. In fact, it appears that one of the most spectacular of Jesus' miracles is essentially unnoticed. Now, once everyone has been fed, Jesus sent the disciples back across the sea while he dismissed the crowds and retreated for prayer. Then in the 4th watch of the night, Jesus sees the disciples in the boat struggling against the wind. According to Roman time, the 4th watch would have been between 3 and 6 in the morning. Therefore, if the disciples had left in the latter part of the afternoon or evening, they would have been on the sea for quite some time. So Jesus goes to them, walking on the sea. However, in verse 48, it reads, he intended to pass by them. But when they saw him walking on the sea, they thought it was a ghost and cried out, for they all saw him and were terrified. But immediately he spoke to them and said, "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." Then he got into the boat with them, and the wind ceased, and they were utterly astounded. At first, it seems that Jesus is walking to them in order to help them. But reading that Jesus intended to pass by them seems to create some confusion. Some have suggested that Jesus was intending to test the disciples' faith. However, Jesus was the one who sent the disciples across the sea in the first place. And seeing them in distress while he was praying, he decides to walk to them on the sea. Therefore, placing them in danger does not seem to fit the situation. So, what is Mark trying to tell us here? We may find help in Jesus' response to the disciples. "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." The Greek here for "it is I" is ego eimi, literally and emphatically, I am. And this is an echo of the name of God, Yahweh. Therefore, perhaps this is much more than Jesus walking on the water to assist the disciples, but a self-revelation of who Jesus really is. He is I am, one with God. Therefore, passing them by may also be connected to similar language used in the Hebrew Bible in Exodus chapter 33, verse 19, which reads, "And he said, I will make my goodness pass before you, and will proclaim before you the name, the Lord." And when the prophet Elijah meets God on Mount Horeb, 1 Kings 19, verse 11 reads, he said, "Go out and stand on the mountain before the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by." Perhaps this story of Jesus walking upon the water is more than Jesus rescuing the disciples, but revealing his true identity as one with the Father. Jesus passes them by as God passed by Moses and Elijah. Also, we should not overlook the connection with the storm itself. In Genesis 1, verse 2, we read, "The earth was a formless void, and darkness covered the face of the deep, while a wind from God swept over the face of the waters." God spoke into the chaos and brought order. This image of a storm raging over the waters is also present here in Mark. And once again, God speaks into the chaos and brings peace and order. Mark chapter 6, verse 51. Then he got into the boat with them, and the wind ceased, and they were utterly astounded. However, the disciples are still struggling to understand or grasp who Jesus is, and we can hardly blame them. That God would send his own Son into the world, the creator of the world becoming part of the creation, is beyond our comprehension. Yet Mark allows us to witness this struggle among those closest to Jesus, to help us better understand the depth, mercy, and power of the Incarnation. Thank you for joining us today. Until next time, stay on the trail.